keep my introduction short. My name is Chuck Ogg. If you haven't been here before, this is the Rock County Progressives, and we are a nonpartisan group whose mission is to promote education and activism around the Rock County area, around progressive issues. We have, for example, an ongoing committee working on Enbridge, if you're familiar with that issue. Enbridge is planning on expanding the amount of putting tar sands oil that they currently pump through Rock County. They're going to expand it 3 times what it is now. More of that's going to go through the Keystone. So those of us who want to, raise some concerns about this are trying to organize. So if you want to be part of that, join us. I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet. So if you want to be on our email list, sign up. Email is often the best way, or sometimes the only way to find out about our events. I'll also pass around a little hat for some donations. A few dollars if you have any are appreciated. Okay. I know that our speaker really needs very little introduction. I assume you've all heard of Congressman Pocan. Just quickly, I think that what we really appreciate about having a strong progressive in Congress these days, I mean, they can't really do very much, obviously, in the way of getting progressive legislation passed, but what they can do is raise issues. And we appreciate that he's raised important issues like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is an incredibly important issue, all kinds of other issues as well. I have my list printed out, but obviously not in front of me. He's done so much. Let's give him a big hand.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we started a little early. We're in the middle of the week of all of our listening sessions in all of our counties. We're just at Edgerton this afternoon, so sorry, there was, I guess, a miscommunication, but we had to go at 7, so we'll still get 40 minutes, so you're getting close to what you're hoping for, but I'll talk less up front and I'll answer more questions. How's that sound? Yeah, just a real quick, I'll give you a quick update where we're at in Congress, and then I really want to answer any specific questions you might have. This session, the biggest difference from last session is that instead of having, before we had the Democrats in control of the House and the Republicans in control of the Senate, now the Republicans control both houses, but we still have the executive branch. So the biggest difference is probably, you still have to, if you're going to actually have something passed legislatively and get signed into law, you're going to have some compromise with the Democrats and the Republicans as far as policy-wise. But you'd expect that things might move faster through the legislative branch since the Republicans are in charge of both branches. So far, we haven't seen a lot of signs of that. They're still having some of the same dysfunction problems we had last session with the Tea Party, although now the Tea Party, the hardcore contingent of 30 or 40, is really 40 to 50 to maybe 55. It got a little bigger at the last election cycle. So they're still doing the same thing. It's the tail wagging the dog. It's essentially people challenging Speaker Boehner within his own party that if he does something to come and get Democratic votes, that they won't leave him in charge as Speaker. And that pretty much causes a very negative effect on how we get anything through the process. So we noticed the hiccups a couple times this year. One of the bills was the Elementary and Secondary Education Reauthorization Act, the No Child Left Behind reauthorization. The Republicans in the House gave us 48 hours notice to see the bill. They had no hearing on the bill for the complete reauthorization of the ESEA bill. We did a 10-hour markup in committee. We got to the floor and debated on the floor, and then they pulled it because they couldn't get votes among Republicans because Heritage Action came out against it. So we're still seeing some of the same dysfunction. You might have remembered we funded Homeland Security for a week because they couldn't get that figured out because they were trying to fight the president on his immigration order. So we're still seeing that dysfunction happen. We did have one positive thing, though, that gives me some hope that if they want to, they actually can work and get something done. And we had the sustainable growth rate for Medicare bill that's been out there, along with the CHIP funding for children's health and the community health centers was all part of that funding. That has been up for reauthorization for quite a while. And last session, every time it came up, quite honestly, both the Democrats and Republicans kind of had funding sources that were completely in contrast to what the other party was going to accept. They weren't related to healthcare. And this time, it came up, and lo and behold, they actually worked out a deal. I think Nancy Pelosi took Speaker Boehner's hand and said, "Come here, honey, I'm going to show you how to do this." And we got it done, and all but 4 Democratic votes and about 20 Republican votes, we got something fairly major and important done. So there is the capacity to do it. Whether or not there is the willfulness from that Tea Party is the real challenge. A few things that I anticipate will be coming up in the next couple months. One is that ESEA reauthorization, because the Senate is still doing a version. I think it's still alive. It should be. We have to get it to move forward. But that's one thing. The transportation bill, we run out of funding end of May. You get a little pattern here. We don't really do things in a very long-term thinking like you're supposed to. The rumor that we're hearing is Republicans are going to extend it just to the end of September, which is the end of the fiscal year. But we need to have something longer term in place for that. You can't, be planning long-term projects a few months at a time. So that's something I anticipate will be happening. All the appropriation bills have just started. Last week we started the first one, and interestingly, it was the bill that has all the funding, Pocan, for the veterans. And every single veterans group, major veterans group, opposed the bill. Because once again, we put lots of money up front into the defense side, but we don't put any money to take care of the veterans after they're back here. So I think we largely opposed that. It passed on a largely partisan vote. But all the veteran groups are against it. But we've got all the other bills, Farm Bill, etc. All will be coming in the coming months if we follow the regular order that you would expect. Trade, I know I'll probably answer more specific questions. I'll just give you the general. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is the biggest trade deal we've had in a long, long time. It's NAFTA on steroids. It's 40% of the world's gross domestic product in one trade deal, which to me says we want to get this right. Instead, they want to get it fast. So we've got a fast-track proposal that could happen as early as next week, which the fast-track authority gives whoever is the president the ability to finalize all the negotiations essentially by themselves, and we get an up or down vote. Now, the Constitution gives that power to Congress to do, and unfortunately, we would not, if with fast-track authority, we would not be able to amend the agreement. You can have limited debate. It's about 20 hours between both houses. That's a little over 2 minutes per member on a trade deal that encompasses 40% of the world's gross domestic product. One thing that Elizabeth Warren pointed out when we were with her just a little while ago that I thought was really significant was it's an authorization not just for the TPP. It's an authorization for 3 years, and without an affirmative vote of Congress goes to 6 years. So that means not just this president, but the next president, and conceivably the next president. So I know you don't want to hear that, but President Scott Walker could potentially have this authority that we would give, as well as any future president. And we know that TTIP, which is the European trade agreement, is the next one that's being finalized, just the parts that are left. And we know for a fact that there are some folks in the financial industry who would like to repeal some of the aspects of Dodd-Frank that were put in as protections from the crash, and that could conceivably happen to us. So we're real concerned about the fast-track vote. That's the important vote that could come very, very soon. As soon as the White House and the Republican leadership decide they've got the votes, we'll have that vote coming up. I probably spend 30% of my time right now trying to fight that, but that's something that's going to be coming up in the next few months. And potentially, although I don't think it's going to come for a vote, people always talk about tax reform, that there's going to be some kind of meaningful. Paul Ryan talks about it now, this chair of Ways and Means. That's, I think, extremely unlikely, just given that we're not even doing the 101 part of the job, the appropriation bills and the reauthorizations. It would be hard then to get to the next step, which would be actually, getting to things like tax reform, where there's so many little carved out, tax issues for different industries that to try to reform that could be very difficult. So that's just a quick update where we're at. Let me give you a little bit more positive, if I can, on the Progressive Caucus side. I now serve as the first vice chair for the Progressive Caucus. So Keith Ellison and Raul Grijalva are our chairs, and then I'm the first vice chair. Keith and I do a lot together. We've been really moving a lot of things. One of the things we did that we were really proud of during the budget process, I do serve on the budget committee, but we have a separate amendment on the floor of Congress for the Progressive Caucus budget, which is a much more aggressive version of a budget. Although, to be fair, the Democratic version of the budget is got pretty good because they keep taking ideas that we put out in the Progressive Caucus budget, and a few years later they incorporate them. One of them being the financial transaction fee, the Robin Hood tax that Keith Ellison had out there, so that for this fast trading, they never get any kind of charge on it, we don't collect anything on that. Now, Chris Van Hollen, who's the ranking on the Budget Committee, put the Democratic proposal, and also the European Union is enacting one of those. So the ideas that we put out there have legs and come in. So, we obviously spend a lot less on the defense up front, but we do protect our veterans on the next step, which we don't unfortunately do in the budget the Republicans put forward. We have a new proposal that hasn't been out there before that I think is already gaining traction with both Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton, which is a debt-free college proposal. So it's not just the idea of the repayment of loans, which is the idea they created out of Wisconsin. It's not just the idea of lower interest loans, but it's the idea that with some funding from the federal government going to states, this is just for the state system, so it wouldn't be for private colleges. But for the state system, you would be able to, through work study, through some of the federal dollars going to the state, and maintenance of effort requirements. So in other words, Scott Walker, who's cutting $300 million from the university system, he's left with like a handful of people in the country are still doing that. That would run exactly counter to what those measures would be, but you can actually create it. So you could have a free college system. Demos is a group that put the proposal out there, and we're advancing that idea. So we put a lot of ideas out there. The good news is, even though we had fewer Democrats this session than last session because we lost some seats, we got more votes for the Progressive Caucus. We actually got a majority of our Democratic caucus to vote for it. So the good news is, the ideas that we're putting forth are getting more attention. That's part of my job, because obviously, if I told you my job right now is passing bills in this climate, we know not a lot is passing, but we still have that bully pulpit. We can still talk about things that we know that will become, hopefully, a reality down the road, and we're very aggressive on that. So whether it be on a living wage, whether it be on non-discrimination in employment, whether it be all the issues that were out there, we've been putting that forth. In last session, we were instrumental in getting 3 different executive orders done by the president. One was the immigration executive order. We were part of a coalition requesting that. 2 was the non-discrimination in employment executive order. Essentially, it's the ENDA bill, but for federal contractors. And 3, the one that we led specifically was to raise the minimum wage for federal contractors to $10.10, which was the bill that was out there last session. What's significant about those is, even though they're an executive order and it's not in statute, it can be overturned by a future president. They're usually hard to do that because you put it out there. It's a lot harder to do that. But the federal contractors and their subcontractors are something like 22 to 24% of the economy. So you do a big step just by doing that. So we've been working very aggressively with outside partner groups to take on those kind of issues and try to move those things forward. So we've had some successes. It's still a very challenging Congress, obviously. We've still got an interesting group of folks to deal with. But as I've always done, I try to find what you have in common with people on the other side of the aisle, because there are people right now I'm working with. Last week I met with the House Liberty Caucus within the Republican Party. Some of those folks I don't have a lot in common on a lot of issues, but we are working together, especially Thomas Massey from Kentucky. He and I have a bill to completely repeal the Patriot Act and the FISA amendment that allows for the collection of data. So we're meeting and figuring out how we can, get the votes on both sides to try to do that, if nothing else, to make whatever proposal does come up better, because we have those provisions. We have provisions to not allow the federal government to coerce the groups that make our phones and our software, to give them backdoors to use for security. I don't know if you saw it. There was an article last week. One of the founders of the internet was quoted saying why that's a terrible idea, because once you have a backdoor for the government, that's also a backdoor for the hackers. And since we already have a huge problem in that area, it doesn't make sense. And we also have whistleblower protections as well that we need that aren't in the current proposal. So we're trying to put these ideas out there to make the other things that come through better. I think we've had some good successes. And because of the time, I'm going to wrap it up with that. And I'd much rather take your questions, because that way I can answer anything specific you have. So
let me just say, I just wanted to apologize for those who just came in. I'm probably confused as to why our speaker's already begun. Unfortunately, there was a communication mix-up. He has to leave at 7. So that's why we started a little early, and he ended his comments a little quickly. But now it's the question and answer. So if you have any questions, feel free to keep in mind he will be leaving around 7:30. 7. I will stick around for a little bit and leave. I don't know yet what, some kind of discussion, or I'll tell jokes, drive over. We'll see. So thanks for your patience.
So yeah.
How much of the TPP have you actually seen?
Okay, so TPP, I could literally put you all to sleep talking about TPP. I spend about 30% of my day every day now on TPP because the crunch time for the last 2.5 years I've been working on is now. It could be next week to vote. So in the last 2.5 weeks, twice I've gone into the room that you could go read it in because it's classified. Don't forget, 600 people drafted the TPP, largely CEOs and others. It's not members of Congress. It's not people from the labor community. Not people from the environmental community. So it's all drafted in secret, as you know, and we have to, in order to read it, have to go into a classified setting. You have my phone and everything. We had a small victories. I can now bring a staff member if they have classified clearance to come in, but I still can't write any of the text of the agreement down. But I've looked extensively at labor chapter, let me take one step back. There's 29 chapters, about 5 are really about trade, 24 about everything else in the world. Labor, environment, procurement, and the investor chapter, which is the ISDS, the Investor State Dispute Settlement negotiation. And then there's a couple other random ones at the end that there's parts of, because what I did is I came in with questions. Reading the text doesn't mean much. Unless you're a corporate trade attorney, you don't know what you're reading. But you know what questions to ask, and you're looking for the combined bracketed text, which is what's left to be decided. It tells you what countries are looking at it. And I can't give you any specifics because it is classified, but what's funny is I had a staffer from the Ways and Means Committee, our Democratic committee in there, and I went through with an hour. I had 3 pages of really intricate questions, and at the end she goes, I feel like I just had my dissertation thing again, because we just went through very specific details. What I can share from that generically, more without these specifics, is this is certainly not a trade deal that's going to do anything to help American jobs or American wages. You're going to have the same problems you've had in the past. If you think about the countries that are involved in the TPP, Vietnam, for example, doesn't allow unions. Minimum wage is pocket change, literally pocket change. And that's going to be very difficult. Human rights concerns and other things in the country. Brunei, the Kingdom of Brunei is part of the deal. Kingdom of Brunei has implemented Sharia law, which includes the stoning of single mothers and gays and lesbians. And we're rewarding them with preferred status through trade. So I've looked at different parts of that, but labor, the language they will argue is marginally better than in the past, but still lacks enforcement. And that's the problem that we've always had with it. Environmental language, I would argue, is weaker than the past, because some of these countries, it's impossible to bring to any kind of modern standards. There are 2 small areas that I think I can say, because they're already out there. If you really care about shark fins, you'll be happy. And there's one other fishing regulation that's better, and everything else in general is pretty bad. And again, no enforcement of the bad language. There's still a lot to be that won't be improved around investor-state dispute settlement. Investor-state dispute settlement is the mechanism for a multinational corporation to engage to contest a law that a local government might pass. So, if you are in violation of labor law, like we had an issue in Guatemala, we went through the legal system, and 6 years later we have resolution. 6 years later. If you are a multinational corporation, and Wisconsin, when I was in the legislature, we passed a Buy American law that said tax dollars had to be spent in the United States, and they say that is going to hurt my business, they can sue Wisconsin for that. One, to change the policy, because it's regulation, but really what they do is it's about money. They sue for money on that, what they're damaged, including future profits. That's the language that's in there. So they could sue Wisconsin for that, which makes it's basically, as Elizabeth Warren says, it's a way to bust regulations, right? That's why the Republicans are so excited about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of that's still there. And don't forget, the panel that does the dispute resolution is 3 corporate attorneys. So on Monday they work for Corporation X, On Tuesday, they're the fair arbitrators of law. And on Wednesday, they're back on Corporation X's payroll. So that's a big problem we have. Let me go back to on labor and environment, why I say there's no enforcement. I also recently was put on with Sandy Levin from Michigan and Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, a working group on the implementation of the Colombian free trade agreement. Even though it was 4 years ago that it passed, there's the implementation for labor standards that are there. And because Tammy Baldwin and I, when we were on the county board, helped form a sister city in Columbia, I've been down there like 4 times. So I joined this and I met with labor leaders as well as business people down there back many years ago. What we just had is the labor leaders come to give us their report on supposedly this great language that's in the trade agreement, and they gave it a 1.5 out of 3 score. And what they said to us was, the language is now all been implemented in Columbia law, letter for letter, it's all in there. But the reason it got a 1.5 out of 3, there's absolutely no implementation, no actual practice of that language, because we don't require it. There's no practical hammer in a trade agreement to have that. And now the U.S. Trade Representative's Office is going around using this as an example of the best practice, and we're like going, best practice, it didn't change a thing. Labor leaders are still threatened and violence and all the rest. So there's none of that enforcement that's in there. What should be in there that's not in there? How about currency manipulation, right? Because that's the issue that we really have that should be in there, and we've talked about this for many times. On there, one of the problems, you can have the best language in the world in a trade deal, but if Japan, for example, which what they did recently, they manipulated the currency by about 30%, that could just change everything you had in there, right? And Elizabeth Warren, again, who, you know, I've really grown to have enormous respect for in Congress, she takes the complex and makes it simple. You know, she's a professor, and I think that's her background. On that, she just does a really great job of saying, basically, for all practical purposes, there's not that many tariff issues that exist left in the world. We're a global economy. I mean, Japan, we've got some tariff issues on autos and ag, but largely they're not there anymore. So you don't really need these trade deals to deal with that. These trade deals, there's 29 chapters and only a few deal with trade are about everything else. Intellectual property, food safety. Really, it's like basically about corporate profits and how to expand their access, but doesn't have any of the protections for consumers, certainly not for workers or the environment. So I'm going to stop at that because I can keep going on it, but what I do pretty much every day is we have a group that's been meeting weekly for the last 2.5 years, members of Congress, labor leaders, environmental and consumer groups. We're now down to, we have at least 84% of the House Dems with us. There are probably now maybe 15 to 20 Democrats in the House voting for it, and there's probably another 15 maybe to 20 left in the middle, and my numbers are a little off. I can refer to those as the squishy ones. We're trying to firm them up on the right side, and so we're doing a lot of advocacy, find out what their issues are, trying to get them right. Interesting, I also work with Republicans. I've never believed in separate but equal before until now, for in this particular situation where my arguments about Brunei stoning gays and lesbians is not going to be real effective with the average Republican, but there are issues that are very important to them around trade. In ISDS, we have definite common bonds on that, but there's other unique issues they need, so that I work with some of the folks that are their leaders. And there was an article last week, and if it's true, it's extremely strong, that we may now have 75 votes on their side. If that's true, the White House needs like 50 Democrats, and there's not enough votes left to get to 50. So he's really going to have to be prying people off of a publicly stated position against it. So, but at the same time, the White House is extremely aggressive and bought in on trying to get this done, and we are fighting above our weight as we're trying to do this, but we are very active in trying to protect it. So I give you a really long answer just because I spend so much time on this. I hope you don't mind, but it's a real relevant current issue that's before us.
I can just ask you, I've heard Harry Reid might be opposed to it.
He is. In fact, he's now saying he's going to use it as a tool to make sure that he won't even allow it to come up unless he can get, I think it's the transportation bill and something else. 2 other things he's trying to get done with it. It was just in the news in the last 24 hours. So, but again, you know, most Democrats are soundly against this, but this is the vote, because if fast track passes, it's very unlikely you'll stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership when it's finally negotiated. I will not give that long of an answer again. So, Gary,
if this was really about trade, then currency would be #1. That would be the number one thing they would negotiate, because, you know, like the Vietnamese currency, they're paying like 11 cents an hour for their employees. So their currency must be undervalued by a factor of like 30 times when you compare minimum wages. So currency should be number one. But I realize that they keep passing these trade agreements as standard legislation for reasons of expediency, I assume.
You've talked to me about this before too, yeah.
But there is no provision within the Constitution for agreements with foreign powers other than by treaty. I can find no authorization for this agreement. They shouldn't even be passing it. It would have to be renegotiated as a treaty and passed by assented to by 2/3 of the Senate.
I know you put that. I know you put the proposal out there, but no one else in DC has decided that that's the effective argument. Trust me, there's a lot of people trying to kill this, and if it had enough merit, I think they would have grabbed onto it.
So you got 535 members, and they only take an oath to the Constitution.
Right.
And
the power specifically for this is given to Congress, which is why we don't want to give up our authority through fast track, right? And but we're doing our best. Right now, there are some key issues for folks. ISDS is really a really key one for both Democrats and Republicans. Another thing for those of you who care about global warming, I know a lot of you are climate change, citizens climate change lobby and things. I can tell you this without getting into the specifics, but when President Obama made the agreement with China, which I think is great, that they've got the standards and goals put in place, it's a 3-page document of those principles. I would think that in a trade agreement with all the countries that are in that region, you would also want to have something equally strong. I don't know if we'll have it in there without saying it specific, but again, that's part of the enforceability problem, right? So, if you care about, that's why I'd say the environmental chapter is a step backwards, unless you care about shark finning. That's one of the few things that's been carved out, and then one other area around fisheries.